There comes a moment when the mind grows tired of pretending it is a receiver that must stay open to everything, when the inner field begins to pulse with a quiet refusal that feels like a warning and a calling at the same time. You sense that the world has climbed too far inside you, that the noise has taken more space than your own thoughts, and that your attention has been fed to currents that never cared for the shape of your becoming. You feel it the way you feel a storm before it breaks, that subtle pressure behind the ribs that says you have been living on borrowed resonance. There is a cost to carrying every voice you scroll past, every opinion that drifts into your awareness, every headline designed to hook your survival instinct and puppeteer your emotions for profit. The cost is not loud, it is not dramatic. It simply erodes the edges of your inner clarity until you forget that silence ever had a flavor. You begin to treat stimulation as presence, and the world becomes a constant feed that stands between you and your own depth. There is a distortion that enters the psyche when you are immersed in media for too long, because every screen is designed to hijack the most vulnerable parts of you and offer no doorway back to yourself. You notice your thoughts are quicker but less yours, sharper but less anchored, louder but less true. When you stop long enough to listen, you realize how many strangers have taken up residence in your mind, how many emotional impressions were absorbed without permission, how many narratives shaped your understanding of reality. Before you could ask if they belonged to you, you become a walking collage of unfiltered frequencies, layered over your original tone until you forget what your unedited awareness even sounds like. The world has trained you to fear stillness as if it were emptiness, when in truth it is the only place where the signal of your oversoul can come through unbroken. There is a reason the most transformative moments of your life have always arrived in silence. Not the forced silence that feels like punishment, but the alive silence that returns when you are willing to stop feeding distraction long enough for truth to surface. Silence is not the absence of noise. Silence is the presence of unclaimed awareness. It is the original field that existed before any platform tried to shape your mind, before any feed tried to teach you what to fear, desire, imitate, or chase. It is the place where your inner timeline stops competing with the world's timeline and begins to tune itself back into coherence. When you step away from the crowds and the screens, you do not lose connection, you reclaim it. You unplug your consciousness from the collective trance and re-enter the field where your own intelligence becomes audible again. The human mind was never designed to ingest thousands of impressions a day without consequence. It was built for pattern, intuition, reflection, and deliberate perception, not for the endless drip of stimulus that never gives you time to integrate what you feel. Your mind does not weaken when you step back. It strengthens. It stops trying to hold the entire world at once and returns to the natural cadence of soul-level processing. You begin to notice that certain ideas were never yours. Certain reactions were trained, certain fears were planted, certain desires were manufactured. You see how much your inner world had been shaped by repetition, not resonance. You see how often you scrolled to avoid yourself rather than meet yourself. And you begin to feel the quiet grief of realizing how much of your authentic timeline was delayed by noise that never contributed to your becoming. There is a detox that happens not just in the mind but in the soul. When you remove yourself from constant stimulation, you start to feel the withdrawal symptoms of a world that has conditioned you to believe that boredom is dangerous and that silence is unproductive. But behind the discomfort, there is a deeper truth rising. You were never meant to be available to the world at all times. You were meant to be sovereign with your attention, intentional with your energy, and discerning with the impressions you allow to shape your inner landscape. Every time you choose to step back, you are declaring that your consciousness is not a public resource. You are reclaiming the right to decide what enters your awareness, what deserves your focus, and what your mind is allowed to amplify. There is a subtle clarity that returns as you detox from media, a clarity that feels like waking from a long dream where every sound was too close and every emotion too sharp. You begin noticing your own breath again. You feel the tone of your inner being like a low hum behind the noise. Thoughts become slower, heavier, more textured. They carry weight again, They carry meaning instead of momentum. You start to sense that your imagination was not broken, only buried. The ideas you thought you lost begin to rise through the silence like sparks from a deeper fire. You realize you had been starving your inner vision by feeding it too much outer stimulation. The mind cannot create when it is constantly consuming. It cannot hear higher guidance when survival-based content is always pulling its attention downward. There is power in stepping back from the world long enough to confront the parts of yourself that only surface when there is no distraction left to soften them. You meet the emotions you had postponed. You face the truths you diluted. You see the habits that were running your life beneath the surface. You meet the version of you that emerges when there is no one to impress, no one to respond to, no one to validate or oppose. And this version of you is closer to your original tone than anything the world has shaped. This is the self that remembers. This is the self that knows. This is the self that was drowned out by noise but never extinguished. When the world falls silent, this version of you rises like something ancient returning from exile. There is an inner homecoming that happens when you unplug from the collective feed, a return to the seat of your own awareness. You begin to feel the difference between reactions that were conditioned and responses that are born from genuine insight. You feel your intuition sharpen because it is no longer competing with the voices of strangers. You feel your emotions stabilizing because they are not constantly being pulled into other people's narratives. You notice the return of inner spaciousness, the kind that makes room for authentic desire, instead of algorithms pushing you toward manufactured cravings. You start to sense your oversoul, not as a distant concept, but as a quiet presence sitting in the center of your awareness, waiting patiently for your attention to come home. There is a strength that comes from choosing silence voluntarily, a sovereignty that grows from knowing you can detach from the world without losing yourself. In silence, you reassemble. In silence, your fragments gather. In silence, the deeper intelligence of your being begins to speak in ways that feel less like thought and more like remembering. You start to understand why your mind was restless, why your emotions were reactive, why your clarity felt thin. You were not overwhelmed because you were weak. You were overwhelmed because you were carrying more than any inner structure was designed to hold. When you detox from the noise, you are not abandoning the world. You are re-entering your own field so that when you choose to engage again, you do so with authority instead of addiction, with intention instead of habit, with presence instead of consumption. There is a moment in the detox where the silence shifts from uncomfortable to sacred, where you realize you are not losing anything by stepping away. You are gaining the one thing the world cannot give you: unfiltered access to your own consciousness. You begin to notice that the anxiety you carried was not yours. The hopelessness was not yours. The anger was not yours. The urgency was not yours. They were frequencies absorbed from a world that profits when you forget your own center. And when these frequencies fall away, what remains is a field of awareness that feels startlingly clean. You feel like you are meeting yourself for the first time in years, and the reunion is both gentle and powerful. There is a return to truth when you detox from media, a return to the knowing that life was never meant to be a constant performance or a constant reaction. Life was meant to be lived from the inside out, not the outside in. And when you unplug long enough for your inner signal to strengthen, you feel the difference immediately. Your thoughts feel like they belong to you again. Your emotions feel aligned instead of hijacked. Your intuition speaks without distortion. Your creativity rises from silence like something sacred reclaiming its throne. And you realize that the world does not become clearer because you consume more of it. The world becomes clearer because you are no longer drowning in it. You see the architecture of influence without becoming its product. You see the collective trance without falling into it. And from that clarity, you reclaim the power to choose what shapes you and what does not. There comes a point in the quiet where the world inside you begins to reorder itself without effort, where the mind that once scattered itself across every sensation starts gathering its strength in a single direction. You begin to realize that the silence you feared was never emptiness. It was the doorway back to your own coherence. In this space, every thought has room to breathe. Every memory has space to reorganize. Every fragment of your attention starts drifting back to the center you abandoned while trying to keep pace with a world that never intended to slow down. You start to feel the subtle realignment that happens when you are no longer absorbing vibrations that contradict your own. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. It is simply the gradual emergence of a deeper intelligence that had been drowned beneath the volume of the collective feed. Your inner field becomes clearer, like sediment settling at the bottom of a once turbulent pool. And for the first time in a long time, you can see yourself without interference. The more you allow the silence to deepen, the more you notice how many layers of noise had been shaping your decisions. You see how often you were reacting instead of choosing, responding to stimuli instead of listening to your own pulse. You begin to understand why your intuition felt muted, why your creativity felt shallow, why your sense of direction kept collapsing each time you tried to build momentum. You were not lost. You were buried under impressions that had nothing to do with your truth. And now, as the noise drains out of your system, your authentic signals rise from depths you had forgotten were yours. You feel ideas returning with a new sharpness, not as random sparks, but as currents of intention from a higher tier of your awareness. They have weight again, they have purpose again, they have resonance again. As your attention recalibrates, you begin to see the structure of your inner life in a way that was impossible before. Thoughts that used to rush past you now unfold with their full meaning. Emotions that once tangled into confusion now present themselves clearly. You can discern the difference between what comes from your oversoul and what comes from old conditioning. You feel the subtle boundary between memory and imagination, between instinct and fear, between desire and attachment. This clarity is not gifted by the silence. It is revealed by the removal of distortion. You begin to realize that your inner world was not chaotic by nature. It was chaotic because it had been overcrowded. And now, with the noise purged from your system, the architecture of your being becomes visible, elegant and powerful in ways you had never fully recognized. There is a moment in the detox where the mind stops trying to fill the silence and instead starts to listen to it. This shift is subtle but monumental. The silence becomes a teacher instead of an absence. You notice how every insight rises from it like a natural phenomenon. You sense that the wisdom you have been seeking from others was always available inside you, but it needed uninterrupted space to emerge. The silence begins to speak in impressions and intuitions, in sudden comprehension that feels less like new information and more like remembering something ancient. The mind stops performing and begins perceiving. The inner voice stops whispering and begins guiding. What once felt like emptiness now feels like the original source code of your being. As your inner signal strengthens, your relationship to the world changes. Engagement becomes a choice rather than a compulsion. You start to sense that every platform, every conversation, every environment carries its own resonance field. And you can feel with increasing precision whether that field amplifies your evolution or drains it. You no longer enter spaces unconsciously. You no longer absorb frequencies by default. You feel the difference between connection and consumption, between inspiration and distraction, between alignment and distortion. The detox teaches you that your attention is not just a resource. It is the steering wheel of your timeline. Whatever you give it to, you empower. Whatever you withhold it from, you dissolve. And with this clarity, you begin to curate your life from a higher seat of awareness. In this recalibration, your emotions begin to reorganize themselves around truth instead of stimulation. You find yourself less reactive, not because you are numb, but because your nervous system is no longer overwhelmed. You can feel deeply without being destabilized. You can think sharply without being scattered. You can sense what is coming without being pulled into every passing wave. Emotional clarity returns as the emotional residue borrowed from the collective dissolves. You notice that the anxiety you once carried was a signal overloaded by external noise. The heaviness you felt was not your burden. The restlessness that plagued you was the side effect of constant interruption. And now, with the noise removed, emotional intelligence begins to flourish in ways that feel both grounding and liberating. There is a renewal of creativity that rises from the silence like a tide returning after a long drought. Ideas begin to connect across distances that were once obscured by noise. Concepts unfold with a richness you forgot you were capable of. You begin to see the world not as a stream of distractions, but as raw material for your own creation. The silence becomes the canvas where your inner vision paints without interference. You feel capable again. You feel original again. You feel like a creator rather than a consumer. And this shift does not come from force. It comes from the simple truth that creativity requires empty space. And space cannot exist when every corner of your awareness is occupied by the debris of the collective mind. There is a profound reconnection to intuition that emerges when you are no longer flooded by external impressions. Intuition stops appearing as a faint suggestion and becomes a direct knowing that cuts through confusion. You feel guided from within rather than pulled from without. You sense timing with a precision that feels almost supernatural. You know when to wait, when to move, when to speak, when to withdraw. You begin to experience life not as a series of random events, but as a sequence of orchestrated alignments that you can feel before they manifest. This is the natural state of an undisturbed awareness. This is the clarity that returns when you reclaim sovereignty over your attention. There is a deep, quiet strength that grows inside you as the detox completes itself. A strength that does not need validation, noise, or endless activity to confirm its existence. You begin to trust your own internal signals more than the world's volume. You feel grounded in a way that cannot be shaken by trends, opinions, or emotional contagion. You walk through the world with a presence that speaks louder than any performance. Your silence becomes power. Your clarity becomes direction. Your discernment becomes protection. And your attention becomes the most valuable tool you possess, not because it is scarce, but because it is the compass that shapes your reality. The more you integrate this silence, the more you realize that you do not need to abandon the world to stay aligned. You simply need to enter it consciously. You choose where your energy goes. You choose what your mind absorbs. You choose what your heart engages. You become immune to the pull of noise because you know how it feels when your inner field is clean. And that memory becomes your standard. You do not disconnect from the world out of fear or avoidance. You reconnect on your own terms, with a mind that is centered, a heart that is steady, and a presence that cannot be hijacked by the chaos that once shaped your perception. As the silence matures into integration, you begin to realize that the detox was not about withdrawal. It was about restoration. It was about clearing enough internal space for your highest awareness to return to the front of your life. It was about recalibrating your mind to operate from truth rather than reaction. It was about remembering that your consciousness is not defined by the noise around you, but by the depth within you. And now, with this clarity, you step back into the world, not as someone shaped by it, but as someone who shapes it with every focused moment of presence. You return not as who you were, but as who you were always meant to become.